Throughout the long and difficult period of Watergate, I have felt it was my duty to persevere, to make every possible effort to complete the term of office to which you elected me.
That was Richard Nixon on August 9, 1974, resigning from the office of the presidency. As we all know, the events of the Watergate scandal had led up to this moment. But what is more important to understand is the court case that ultimately attributed to the end of his presidency. Let's find out how it all started. On June 17th, 5 months before the election of 1972, 5 men broke into the DNC at the Watergate Hotel. These men had ties to the Republican Party. However, it did not affect Nixon's re-election. He won by an electoral landslide. Problems started gaining traction in 1973 when the Senate established a committee to investigate the break-in. On July 1973, White House assistant Alexander Butterfield was asked on live television if he was aware of listening devices in the Oval Office.
Butterfield, are you aware of the installation of any listening devices in the Oval Office of the President?
I was aware of listening devices.
His full disclosure on the Oval Office tapes caused the special prosecutor Archibald Cox to immediately subpoena them. Nixon refused, citing his executive privilege. As a result, the Saturday Night Massacre ensued as Nixon fired Cox, but due to outcry, was forced to appoint another prosecutor, Leon Jaworski. Nixon believed that Jaworski may be on his side, but instead Jaworski simply picked up where Cox left off. He obtained another subpoena for the tapes that had recordings between Nixon and the Watergate burglars. Instead, in order to avoid incriminating himself, Nixon turned in 43 edited transcripts of those conversations. Nixon then had his attorney ask the judge of the District Court of Columbia to quash or invalidate the subpoenas that Jaworski pressed on him. But the judge resisted. U.S. v. Nixon fully ensued. This matter was taken directly to the Supreme Court, as Nixon cited that matters within the executive branch was not subject to judicial overview. What was argued in the Supreme Court? Nixon cited his executive privilege as one that is important to national security. If confidentiality of his communications is not maintained, then national security may be at risk. In addition, he believed that the separation of powers allowed him, and him only, to deal with matters in the executive branch. However, the prosecution stated that Article 3 gives the power to the courts to provide a check on branches of government, and that the Sixth Amendment gives the right to a fair trial. A fair trial cannot be conducted without proper evidence, the evidence being the tapes. In a matter of 3 weeks, the Supreme Court reached a unanimous decision that Nixon had to hand over the tapes. They stated that if the courts cannot provide a check on other branches, then the power of the courts is severely diminished. In addition, the judges also believed that the prosecution had provided sufficient evidence to show that the tapes contained incriminating evidence, thus the need for a fair judicial process overrides executive privilege. Chief Burger delivered the statement that neither the doctrine of separation of powers nor the need for confidentiality of high-level communication without more can sustain an absolute unqualified presidential privilege of immunity from judicial process under all circumstances. However, the courts had to determine what executive privilege actually meant, since this is the first time it has appeared in a court case. They concluded that executive privilege only pertained to matters of military or diplomatic communications or events that were to remain confidential. Nixon handed over the tapes to the district court. 15 days later, he resigned.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.